Okay, so for this next video, guys, we're going to be solving these by factoring. So you need to remember that the first thing you do with factoring is you, once again, label your A, your B, and your C. So here we have a 1, so we're going to label that A. Here we have a -4, so that's B. And then we have a 21, that's C. Okay, so when you factor, the first thing you do, you have to just remember these steps. And this may be something you want to study. If you don't know it, I'm just going to write it here. 1 is you multiply A times C. 2, you find factors of AC that add to B. Okay, and then you're going to write it like this. You know, it's either going to be plus or it's going to be either plus or minus here, but not both. Okay, so just you're going to write it like this. I'm going to take that out just so you don't get confused. Okay, and then you're going to divide by A. I'm just going to make this plus here. I'm going to make it plus is what I'm going to do. Because if it's negative, it will be minus, and that will always be right. You're going to divide by A, and then you're going to simplify, and, not or, and bottoms up, and then solve. Okay? So solve both. Right? Solve both, is what I'm going to say. Okay? So you may want to write this out and kind of like, you know, memorize this. And so then if you're getting stuck, you could have this written on your test somewhere that you've given yourself your steps, and then you can look back at it, okay? So first step is to multiply A times C. So 1 times -21 is -21, okay? And then the next step is to find factors, and I'm going to draw this right here. You might want to do that as well to help you remember what that means. To find factors of AC that add to B. And so we need to know what multiplies to equal 21 and adds to equal -4. Okay. And you may also want to just kind of have this in mind as well. If you are the kind of person who knows your multiples, your multiplication factor really well, then you're going to find this to be really easy. If you're somebody who's just like, that's not real easy for you, you may find this to be more difficult. But that's okay, because you can use y equals, and then you just put -21 divided by x, and then you go to second graph to the table right there, and you'll have a table of possible answers. So I'm going to try to go to where my x is kind of 0 and kind of go from there. And, okay, I know I'm wanting 1 negative and 1 positive because it's going to, it's multiplying to 21. And I also know that to -21, and I also that it's going to add together to going to be negative, which means that the negative number is going to be farther from 0. So I'm going to have go down on the positive x's to try to find one. So I've got 1 and -21, but if I add those together, it equals -20. So that's not what I want. I've got 3 and -7, but if I add those together, I get -4. You guys see where I'm getting these? 1 and -21, 3 and -7. Okay, and I'm just finding the ones that don't have decimals. So this is the one I want. I want 3 and -7 because that adds up to -4. So then I'm going to put it in, and now you come back over here and look. This is where we want it to look like this. After we found the ones we want it to look like this. So we're going to do x plus 3. And then x plus -7 is the same thing as x minus 7, right? Okay, because it's negative. And then it's still equal to 0. That part of it hasn't changed, okay? And then our next step is to divide by A. Now, I'm going to write this in blue just because you may notice on this one, this step is not necessary, and I'll show you why in just a minute. You divide by A, you're dividing by 1 because A is 1. And then the next step is to simplify and bottoms up, okay? So if we do that, we're going to have x plus 3 divided by 1 is 3. And then -7 divided by 1 is still -7. And you can see why dividing by 1 was not necessary. Because it's 1, it's not necessary. So you can just skip that step when it's 1. However, over here when it's 5, you can't skip it. You have to do it. Okay? So now it's ready to solve. Okay, that's the last step, is to solve both. Okay, but what did I mean by both? Okay, if you multiply to equal 0, like 5 times 0 is 0. 0 times 352 is 0. One of the numbers has to be 0. The other one could be anything, but one of them has to be 0. So these are being multiplied. So one of these has to be 0 in order for this whole thing to equal 0. So we're going to divide and set them equal to 0. So we've got x plus 3 equals 0 and x minus 7 equals 0. And then we just simply solve. And we get x equals negative 3. And we get x equals 7. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at number 4. On this one, once again, we're gonna first labels our A, our B, and our C. And we've got 5 times negative 2 equals negative 10. Okay? And then we're going to find our factors of negative 10 that add up to 9. And this is probably one you could do in your head, but just in case you can't, I'm going to still do it on the calculator just to show people how to do it on the calculator. Y equals, and then you just take negative 10 divided by x, and then go to your table. All right, and I want it to be a negative number, which means I want our bigger number to be negative, so I'm going to go positive on the x's. Okay, you can always also go negatives, so don't forget you can go up to the negatives, okay? So I've got 1 and negative 10. When I add those together, I'm going to get negative 9. So right off the bat, I found what I wanted. This is what I want, because I want it to equal negative 9. Okay, so then I want to write it x plus 1, and then x plus a negative 10 is the same thing as x minus 10. So I'm good just writing x minus 10. All right, and then I need to divide by a. Okay, this is where here it was optional because it was 1. Here it is not optional because it's 5. So now I'm going to simplify and bottoms up. So 1/5 cannot be simplified. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to bottoms up in just a minute. But negative 10 divided by 5 can. That's negative 2. All right. And now I'm going to bottoms up. So this is going to come up here. So 5x plus 1 and x minus 2 equals 0. Okay. And then I need to, one of these factors have to be equal to 0 in order for the whole thing to be equal to 0. So 5x plus 1 equals 0. X minus 2 equals 0, and then we solve. Okay, so my answers are negative 1/5 and 2. You may notice, hopefully you do, that these are the opposite of these numbers right here. That will always be true. Okay, you still have to bottoms up and give us this. You have to give us our answers, but if you notice that pattern right here, the opposite of these are these. If you notice that pattern, you can use it to your advantage to save yourself some time.